Well, let's talk about what's going on at home for a minute to see if we can clean up the mess down here. We got the story from the New York Post. Hunter Biden's former business partners cooperated completely with feds in tax probe. The New York Post reports Devin Archer, who was awaiting sentencing in an unrelated fraud case, is among 4 people reportedly referenced in a May 15, 2019 subpoena, first reported by the Post, sent to JP Morgan Chase Bank for records related to any transaction involving the Bank of China. The others include James Biden, a younger brother of President Joe Biden. A partial copy of the subpoena was posted online by the Marco Polo USA research group headed by Garrett Ziegler, who worked as a White House policy analyst under former President Trump. Mr. Archer was not aware of the specific subpoena from 2019, which appears directed to a bank. His lawyer, Matthew Schwartz, told the Post in an email. But Mr. Archer has cooperated completely with the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office investigation from the moment he became aware of it. So they're looking into transactions involving China. The first thing I want to say is, look, there may be some connection to Hunter Biden, but if you were to ask me, do I think anything in terms of accountability would happen to the Biden family? I would say probably not. Maybe if Donald Trump gets elected in 2024. But Peter, you seem to be much more of an expert than I. So what do you think?
Well, I don't know. You might be right, Tim. I think if the Republicans take the House and the Senate, you're going to get congressional hearings. Some of those committees have subpoena powers.
Will they impeach Joe Biden? I think they should.
Well, they may very well. I mean, one of the things that troubled me the most in this new book, I did the first Hunter Biden China stuff back in 2018 in a book that I wrote. And at that time, it was a story of like corruption and cronyism and self-dealing and all that. What we did more recently for this book is we went through the Hunter Biden laptop and we went through some of the emails of one of his business partners who gave us access to his Gmail account. And we wanted to figure out, so the Bidens got all these deals in China that Hunter wasn't qualified for. Who actually made it rain, right? Who actually gave the Bidens this money, which is like $31 million in deals? So we traced it back. And what we found is that there were 4 guys that set these deals up. Every single one of these guys has links to the highest levels of Chinese intelligence. So like one guy named Che Feng set him up for a $20 million payday. Che Feng at the time was business partners with a vice minister of state security who's in charge of recruiting foreign spies for the Chinese. Wow. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, and every single case this was. So, the Biden case no longer is just cronyism and corruption. I mean, we have to entertain the notion that the Chinese targeted the Bidens, they got the Bidens, and that the Bidens are compromised. It's an intelligence operation. I mean, it has all the markings of it.
Isn't it crazy that we spent so many years talking about Trump and Russia?
Yeah.
But now we're here talking about Biden and China?
Yeah, and here, unlike the Trump case, I mean, when the dossier first came out, okay, I fell for it. I was like, hey, we got to look at this. Like, this looks serious. We got to investigate it. And then, 5 or 6 months later, you realize this thing is completely falling apart. But there, you had no money, right? You had this anonymous dossier, but you had no money. You had no deals. You had no, links to intelligence. With the Bidens, you've got money. Nobody disputes they got the $31 million. And now you've got the fact that the people that made these deals happen all have these intelligence links. So it's completely compromised. And I think that Congress needs to hold those hearings and they need to get the Bidens under subpoena to testify in front of Congress to explain it. But I agree with you. The law enforcement, I've kind of given up on the fact that they're going to hold these elites accountable. There's a different set of law and justice for elites than there is for ordinary Americans today.
And even as far as it can go with a congressional hearing, look, Fauci lied under oath on numerous occasions and nothing.
No accountability. No accountability. You're exactly right.
You look, I think at this point, we look at all the past stories we've already discussed, the split between the left and the right. I think it's fair. If I were to ask all of you listening, do you think when it comes to, say Joe Rogan or anybody else, that the left would be willing to compromise and say, oh, okay, we'll concede this point? The answer is, of course not. They won't. They'll keep pulling and pulling and pulling. It's only the right and the liberty side that keeps conceding. In that capacity, I think it's fair to realize there will never be federal law enforcement accountability for Joe Biden and his family, no matter how much gets reported on it, or Anthony Fauci, no matter how much it gets reported. In which case, what ends up happening is it doesn't matter if there's hard evidence or not. The Republicans come in and they'll be like, hey, we're going to impeach. Why? It's partisan.
Yeah.
We discussed this with there was that Pennsylvania story about the judges striking down the mail-in voting law. I don't know if you heard that recently.
Yeah.
And the judge basically refused to rule on it during the 2020 election because they said, you waited until after your guy already lost to file this.
Right.
The judge had decided because of party affiliation, he would not rule on the merits. Because I assume your side is just doing this to win. If we're at the point where a judge won't look at the actual merits and will just say, well, you're team A, I'm team B, so I say you lose.
Yeah.
Well, that's happening in law enforcement. At what point do people just say the system is clearly broken? There's not going to be any accountability, so it's going to be lawfare, effectively. If the policy lawfare or whatever, if the Republicans win the House and the Senate, they're going to impeach Joe Biden for the sake of it. But this time, will they be able to muster up enough to actually get a conviction? I'd wager probably not. It'll be the exact same thing we saw, and it's basically just a tit for tat until finally the tower just crumbles and falls. Because I don't know how our country can sustain this kind of hyper partisan political attacks and conflict.
Yeah, no, it's scary. I mean, the scenario you laid out is accurate and scary, and part of it is there's not a sense. I mean, you guys disagree with me, obviously, if you do. There just is not a sense of truth with a capital T anymore. And so what do I mean? It's like, in the case that you're talking about the judge, it's not a question of the merits of the case or the evidence. It's who's bringing the facts and the evidence. I mean, I face the same thing all the time. People say, oh, these are just right-wing attacks against the Bidens. And I'm like, explain to me which of these facts are right-wing. I mean, they're all from Chinese corporate documents and Hong Kong financial records. There's no right-wing facts and left-wing facts. They're facts. And you can debate them and you can say whether they're accurate, but we've reached this point. It's like this post-truth element where it doesn't really matter whether it's true. It's who's actually bringing the evidence. And I'm going to attack the messenger rather than actually deal with the underlying evidence. It's scary.
Well, it's simple. I mean, I think Jimmy Dore is a really great example. The dude's clearly economically and culturally left, but because he questions the establishment, he's right wing.
Yeah.
And that's look, they call me right wing, and I'm like, well, look, I'm centrist, so I can understand why they view me, and they'll say those things. But like, come on, Jimmy's basically a socialist, and I don't mean that as disrespectfully. I mean, I think he calls himself that, and they're starting to argue that he's like a right wing grifter.
Right.
So clearly, left and right just means whose side. It just means team A, team B. It doesn't even mean left and right anymore.
Yeah, and there's that Matt Tiabi and Glenn Greenwald are kind of in the same boat. I mean, those guys are both left wing, but because they actually want to try to get to the truth, they get hammered.
Well, truth has a right-wing bias.
That's right.
Yeah, what was that, Colbert, huh?
Yeah,
nice try.
How much of a lie do we live in right now? How much truth can people handle in what increments when we start rolling out the truth?
Man.
Yeah.
You're getting philosophical on
They
this.
don't-
Yeah, we're built on a
The
house
answer
of
is-
cards,
the-
and if we start moving these cards around, there's a chance the entire thing's going to...
This is one of the theories that a friend of mine who's in D.C., former member of Congress, said, I said, they won't have these hearings on, the origins of COVID. And he said, well, of course they won't. And I said, what do you mean, of course they won't? He said, because if they actually come to the truth, they'd have to do something about it.
Oh,
Yeah, we had Tom Garrett on, and he mentioned that when he was in Congress, the Republicans would come to him and be like, well, don't actually support our bill. Because then if we win, what do we have left,
Yeah.
And so there were very much often stories like that, or stories of Republicans being like, oh, we can't support that bill. They'll call us racist.
Yeah.
So it's remarkable how when you learn how things are going behind the scenes that it's all one big joke. It's one big game being played.
Well, and this is why, I mean, look at the rise, like you and Joe Rogan and some of the other people out there. I mean, you obviously have to be courageous of what you're doing, but part of it is too, you have a basis of financial independence based on the business that you've developed. And that's key. I mean, you think about people that get canceled, people that need to fit into the establishment as part of their business model. If you don't have that independence, I mean, you're screwed. And so, when you're talking about truth and how much truth do the average Americans want, you just look at leaders and they may know what the truth is, but they can't discuss it and enunciate it because it could destroy their livelihood. They don't have the independence that you have and other people
Well,
have.
I'll tell you, one thing that really drives a lot of these left activist types nuts is that here we have no investors, no big, institutional investors in any way.
Right.
And so there's always this narrative of like, oh, this person is funded by the Koch brothers or the Mercers.
Right.
And I've seen activists try to make that claim, like he must be getting funding from them. And it's no, just regular people are sick and fed up and have started to fund conversations that they think, works for them. For someone like Joe Rogan, I don't think he runs any of that kind of membership thing. He's just got ad revenue.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure if, the Spotify thing with Rogan resulted in him getting booted and he announced like sign up for Joe Rogan Premium, he'd be making 100 times, 10 times as much money than he's making now.
Right.
$100 million Spotify deal with 11 million listeners per episode.
Yeah.
Imagine if he got 1% to give $10 per month.
And they fear that.
Joe could make it 120 million per year.
Yeah.
Just off of that.
No, they fear that. They fear the fact that you've got subscribers. They fear that there are these other independent sources of information out there because they can't get to the nub of it, and they can't eliminate it. And that's really, unfortunately, what the left wants is they want dominance. And here's the interesting question that I would ask you, because I have a theory on this. The left wants to shut down debate. It comes from a position of, real cultural strength. But I think it really shows their profound intellectual weakness. Because if they really believe, think about this. They shut down all these speakers from going on college campus. If they really felt like these conservative speakers going on college campus are these crazed, racists, misogynists, whatever, I'd say like, let them stand up there and embarrass themselves. But they don't want them to speak. They don't want them to speak because they know the power of the ideas. They are fundamentally lack confidence in their own ideas.
I think also on top of that, even if you did hear that person's ideas and reject them on their merits, it wouldn't be good enough for the left because they don't want you to reject someone because you thought for yourself and decided to reject them. They want you to reject somebody because they told you to.
Yeah.
You have to obey. That's the point.
I get that it's like it seems like a lot of people repeating what they've been told when you talk about the left. And I see that in religion sometimes. People be like, I read it, I was told this is real, so this is real. And like, that's different than when you really believe something, because then you can debate it to anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. To think it through. To be somebody on the left, you can almost get there by osmosis these days because the culture is telling you all of these things. If you're going to be, center right, you really have to think things through.
That's what's really fascinating. For the longest time when all media was controlled, when there were only a few broadcast towers to consume from, there was very little right-wing conversation happening. The establishment just controlled it all, and it was fairly moderate, left-leaning, and slowly drifting left. With the rise of the internet, all of a sudden you ended up with right-wing spaces, areas where individuals could now start speaking and communicate and maintain their value systems. And that's been an impossibility for the left. But with that internet as well, you end up with the left moving 10 times faster than they ever did, pulling further and further to the left, spiraling out of control. But aside from that, I'll just make the point about Joe Rogan. In talking about what the left believes and, what Seamus was saying, everybody, it's almost pointless to even say because so many people have made this point already that none of these people complaining about Joe even watch his show.
Right.
They don't listen to it. They have no idea why they're mad.
Right.
And that's the scary thing. And the example I like to use is this guy I know posted a meme, a tweet in reference to Joe Rogan. And a guy said, in Germany, we have a saying, if there are 11 people at a table and one of them is a Nazi, and the other 10 are talking to him, you have 11 Nazis. Mm-hmm. And that's a psychotic statement because there's so much nuance there. Is he there because did the Nazi go to a meeting to de-radicalize the other 10 people, former, people trying to de-radicalize him?
Right.
But the fascinating thing there is that the point they're making about Joe is that it doesn't matter how many people he has on that support the narrative. If he brings on one who doesn't, it's all bad and it must be, just removed or banned. In Germany, the story I like to bring up is when there was a journalist and Luke Rudkowski, who was on the show for a decent amount of time, and now he's in Florida. He was walking down the street when someone yelled randomly, Nazi Schweinhund, and pointed at him and this other journalist. So other random people who had no idea who he was started physically attacking him. Oh. Another guy we know was a journalist, and someone screamed at him randomly, Nazi Schweinhund. And so guys ran up, jumped him, and started punching him in the head and grabbed his camera from him. And it's like he's just some journalist guy. They hurt these people. Luke got beat up. just randomly because someone pointed and said those words. That was all it took for these psychopaths to physically harm other people. That is a cult.
Yeah.
That is dangerous. And when they all come out and they're like, Joe Rogan must be banned, and you go, why? Because.
Right.
What did he say? I don't know.
Right.
They don't care. They just want it done.
And then I think the question is, if 11 people being at a table and one of them being a Nazi means that all 11 are Nazis, is Daryl Davis a Klansman for going to talk to people in the KKK and trying to de-radicalize them?
Do you see what happened when Daryl Davis went to our event?
No.
Are you familiar with Daryl Davis?
No.
He's a famous black jazz musician who one day he said to himself, I don't understand how someone could hate me if they don't even know me. So he went and actually met with white supremacists and Klansmen.
Wow.
He went to Klan rallies and he actually talked to them.
Wow.
And then eventually these Klan guys started giving up the robes and quitting and being like, I never realized these stories weren't true, right?
Amazing.
So we had an event in the Philly suburbs called it was called Ending Violence, Racism, and Authoritarianism. And it was like a generally classically liberal event. We had a bunch of people across the political spectrum who all agreed, like, hey, these are things we don't like. Antifa showed up, threatened to burn the theater down. We were forced to move it to a smaller venue at a casino with more security. And Daryl Davis was our keynote speaker. He got a standing ovation from the crowd as he explained how the robes had been given to him. He at the after party, we still had it across from the original theater because the people who ran that venue were unwilling. They were like, we're not going to back down. And when Antifa was outside and the police were blocking it, Daryl was like, I'm going to go out and talk to these guys because, that's his view. How could they hate me?
He did it with the Klan.
And they started screaming at him Nazi and racist and white supremacist, and they would not listen to a word he said. And then he made a post on Facebook that went viral where he said, I cannot believe this. That he posted this story how he said he could walk up to a Klan meeting and they would talk to him and tell him what they believed. But these far left Antifa types just yelled at him and refused to talk at all. And he was shocked by it. So to respond to your point, yes, they very
really
much
think he's
view
a
him as
Nazi.
far right and a Nazi and all that stuff. In fact, he's been smeared because the Klansmen give him the robes and he keeps them. And he shows everybody, look what they've given up. And they're like, aha, he's got it. That proves
Oh
it.
my gosh.
It's insane.
That's so insane. Yeah. That's so
But how do we live with like, when you have a massive cult like that? I mean, look, I'll make this point too. To these leftists, they insult and smear, the white Christian male. Seamus and I do not believe. There's a lot of things we don't believe. Seamus is very, very religious. I'm not. But here we are having conversations. We get along. We're good friends.
Yeah.
How is it that we all found a way to live together, but these people are absolutists and don't accept that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at history, the thing that sticks out to me most are the Maoists, right? In the Cultural Revolution, which was, you weren't discussing anything, you weren't asking people to explain anything. They would go through in the village, and if they saw somebody that had reading glasses, they'd immediately say, well, you're an intellectual, you're a threat. They would throw them in prison based on simple things like that. If you had books, you're a threat to the state. And it's this inability to even have a conversation to try to understand the other person. And it shows it's really not about a care about people. It's about this cultic belief system they have.
I get nervous when I think about Mao's revolution, and they were targeting what they called rightists.
Yes.
They were big on weeding out the right, and I don't want to find ourselves in the same position inadvertently, weeding out the leftists, like making the other out of this idea of a leftist, because that's exactly what Mao was doing. So I don't want to divide people in that sense. I understand there is a psychosis going around right now, but
Ian, I hear you and I agree with you, but I also want to make the point that I made earlier that there's a hard line when the left, for the most part, is completely, I would say, almost is almost absolute in their belief structure. They don't listen to Joe Rogan's podcast, but they want him purged. They go around and destroy and smash up businesses and burn down buildings. And as long as, someone like you is constantly saying like, oh, well, we shouldn't demonize these people and we should figure out a way to avoid that conflict, they're going to say, thank you for conceding and giving us more power. We'll exploit you for that.
Maybe it could be punish the behavior, but not the people.
Well, and I would also say too, I mean, to Tim's point, you have this hardcore elements that does this. And then you have what used to be called fellow travelers, right? These are the guys that kind of went along and they're not as strongly committed. And maybe those are the ones you're talking about. The big question though is, and Tim, I don't know what you think about this, is, what portion of the left are hardcore left and what portion are followers? I mean, can any of them be persuaded?
I do think if we look at the polling data, I mentioned this earlier.
Yeah.
We're seeing an erosion we're seeing a larger portion of Democrat-aligned individuals becoming Republican as opposed to the opposite.
Right.
That it shows the Democratic Party is eroding. I don't think the Republican Party is the solution. I do think the people that are joining the Republicans are doing it out of frustration and looking for some kind of meaningful opposition they're not going to find. But, I think that's the difference.
Yeah.
The people who are in the Democratic alignment are probably default liberal followers or willfully ignorant and willfully going along with it. Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to watch live, you can check out this channel Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Now, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and if you want more unfiltered and uncensored content with all of these guests, go to timcast.com and become a member. All of these guests you know and love in exclusive segments on our website where we are unrestricted in what we talk about, so you'll definitely not want to miss it. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all next time.